Greetings and welcome to Penny for a Tale. This is Mitchell, your host here, and we are joined by Tristan Zimmerman of Molten Sulfur blog. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that blog before we kind of jump into this discussion?
So the Molten Sulfur blog is where I put out free content every Tuesday, gaming content, RPG material, drawn from real history and folklore. So the idea is I take something real, something from history, something from folkloric or religious belief, um, and kind of get into it to the extent that is fun and interesting, like tell you about it and here's why it's cool and here's what's neat about it and here's what's gameable, and then talk about how you can use it at your table, right? Like how can you take this event or this location or this person or this monster or whatever and file the serial numbers off of it so you can drop it right into your pre-existing campaign. I believe the best like material, particularly the sort of like episodic blog material once a week kind of thing, is the stuff that's just ready to go in whatever campaign you're already running. Like, are you running a superheroes campaign? Are you running a fantasy campaign? Are you running a science fiction campaign? Cool, man. Like, let's talk about how you can use this as inspiration for material at your.
Ooh, that sounds really awesome. Yeah, so today we're chatting about having these games set in these historical time periods, as well as as Tristan said, bringing in these awesome ideas into various games. I know one game that kind of shoots out in my mind that I think you would love, Tristan, would be City of Mist. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but let me.
I I've heard about it. It's the sort of thing where I keep seeing references to it. Wait a minute, that's the one that is noir with superheroes, right? Do I have
Yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah. The legends and stuff like that, like the Baba Yaga or Alice in Wonderland, or like what was it? Lancelot and all that stuff.
It's that's definitely the sort of thing that I'm into. Um, for me, I really like um, I really like history and folklore that puts itself front and center, right? Like not necessarily like like flagging itself or calling attention to itself, but where that is the meat of the adventure, right? Like you have this historical setting, you have this event, this whatever, and that's kind of what the game or the adventure is about. It's not so much the you know and also there's time travel or whatever, like it's the that part of it. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to call attention to it, right? Like you don't have to be like, hey guys, just gonna wave my hands here and let you know, like I am aware we're playing Dungeons and Dragons, but this is actually based on an event in the 1580s in the south of France. Like you don't have to say that. You could just take the really cool material, drop it into your Dungeons and Dragons game, and start running with it. And your players, I really genuinely believe, even when you don't tell your players that this is based on something real, your players can tell that this is rich, that this is more vibrant, that this somehow feels more true, and in some cases feels stranger than fiction, um, even if they can't tell you, wait a minute, this is based in something in real history. They're just having more fun. They're having a better time.
That sounds awesome. So, do you have any examples? 'Cause this is like very enticing information here. What are some of kind of like the best adventures you've run or have encouraged other people to run based on kind of like these lores and such?
Oh, well, heck, let's keep running with this France in the 1580s thing. Since we're going on Twitch, let me just reach behind me to my bookshelf here because that's like actually a thing I can do.
It's a nice bookshelf right there.
So there was this really bizarre moment in France in 1580 that I read about in this book, Carnival and Romans. Um, that happened in the town of what is today Romans-sur-Isère in the south of France. And it was this annual spring festival. Like theoretically it was built around a saint's day, like the patron saint of the local industry, which was wool carding. But like really, like it's a spring, like, oh my god, it's not winter anymore, let's get out of our houses and have a good time festival. um that just went incredibly wrong. This was in the middle of the French Wars of Religion. Everything was awful forever, right? Like crazy high taxes, nobody had any food. Um, and this carnival wound up turning into a local uprising against the local aristocrats, but explicitly not against the monarchy or the church. Like it was a rebellion without actually rebelling against the things that matter.
Yeah.
um and these wool carters and farmers and what have you, kind of co-opted all of the traditional rituals of the carnival. Like there's a thing where they would chase an animal through the streets, and they would hold parades, and they would create like a fake court with a fake king and fake courtiers and whatever. And it co-opted all of these rituals to um to create a parallel system of government, right? Like the fake king is basically running the town now, and
Hmm.
his fake soldiers have real guns and will shoot you if you disagree with them. And the fake chase through the streets, which, like, whoever catches the rabbit or whatever is now the rabbit king. Like, well, the whole thing was staged so that the guy that everybody wanted to be the fake king is actually winds up being the real king. And it's super fun. And what I wound up doing with it, I wound up using it in a game of The Sword, the Crown, the Unspeakable Power,
Hmm.
which is basically Game of Thrones but powered by the apocalypse.
Nice, nice.
A lot of fun game, worth checking out. And the player characters were basically just sort of thrust into this morass where there's like four different fake courts, all with different degrees of control over the town. And congratulations, you show up on the scene and you think that you're going to be local power players, but everything is spiraling wildly out of control. And go. And it just wound up being a super fun amount of time with just things going off the rails very quickly. And in some cases they went off the rails in ways that matched the real history, and in some ways they went off the rails in ways that didn't match the real history. But that's the point, right? Like if we just wanted to play through real history exactly as it happened and make sure that nothing deviates, man, we just read a book.
Yeah, yeah.
uh, and so it was a blast, and everybody had a really good time. That Yeah, I think that's a good example of the sorts of gaming content drawn from history that really appeal to me.
What time period was that? Because that sounds like fantastical.
So it's a really weird time period because it was 1580, so the
Mhm.
late 16th century, um, which is, particularly in the rural south of France, is the cusp between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, right? The
Mhm.
Renaissance arrives at different times in different places, and in the rural countryside, like everything takes longer to arrive. And so this was very much the cusp where you see some things going on during this time period that you're like, oh yeah, I recognize that. That's very Renaissance, right? Like for example, the wars of religion between French Catholics and French Protestants. Like that is
Mhm.
very Renaissance. And people are really suspicious. They think my neighbor might be a Huguenot, and I don't like the Huguenots, right? Like you look at that and like, oh, I recognize that as being from this era. But then you look at other things where, like, yeah, you've got local lords living in castles, or they're not like fortified castles; they're more palatial chateaus. But you've got local lords living in castles and
Yeah.
ruling it over people, and these weird these weird festivals and ceremonies that you could look at and be like, wait a minute, is that just a remnant of pre-Christian pagan belief, like dressed up in clothing that is acceptable to the local religious authorities? Like, I'm not saying it is or it isn't. I don't like There's a huge amount of historical contention. How long did some survive dressed with I'm not smart enough to weigh in on that, but boy, it's sure thematically pretty similar. And so it's this amazing mishmash of themes that you don't normally see going together.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. Like I might have to grab that book or at least learn some stuff about it and run it. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
So like two games that kind of stood out in my mind is kind of like these perfect historical pieces and definitely both very different. The first one, I'm gonna grab it real quick. Is Lexicultum by Riot Minds, a Swedish gaming company, and this one is set in the 18th century. Kind of an alternate past type of thing, because obviously, like, there's like actual dark magic and occult and stuff like that. So it's almost like a Call of Cthulhu set in the 18th century. And the second one, I'm gonna grab it here again. Is one I thought had one of the most unique historical settings ever, which is Worm, where you play Neanderthals and such, during the Ice Age, and so two like very, I guess polarizing, very interesting time periods, but very different. Um, so let's touch on the first one for kind of like Lexicultum. And obviously, for those watching, knowledge of the game itself is not really necessary. Just more so kind of diving into a period which is uh, it's explored in media, but definitely not to the degree in a way that is relatable as like 1920s or even the 1960s or movies that are based in like the 1980s. Um, so hopping in Lexiculum the 18th century, what would you give as advice for people who are trying to either role play just as players or for GMs trying to make the world feel real and abundant?
So, um, we are fortunate to be living in the era of Wikipedia, right? Which means that for a game like Lexicultum, um, you have ready access at your fingertips to the sort of wave top information that can really bring a game to life at your table. Um, Stuff like historical maps of the places that you're going. Um, One of the things that I found really interesting with Lexicultum is that in this setting, the occult is real, right? And the
Mhm.
player characters are investigating the occult, but the occult is not established. That this is the age of reason. This is the age of enlightenment. This is and so the occult is kind of linked, is mirrored to the rise in what we as modern people would identify as scientific understanding. And in both cases, like, it's starting to come into its own. That's really fun because it's unusual, right? Like, you don't see that in a Call of Cthulhu.
Mhm.
Like, yeah, man, the cult of Dagon is well established by the
Yeah.
time you show up. um, and so what I would do with that is um, read up on the the Enlightenment thinkers that are writing at this time. Not so much on what are they writing about, because, like, man, I don't know about you, but I can't get through these guys, right? Like, you
It's
you
tough.
sit down, you read their books, it's like, oh my god, I
Yeah.
get
I took an ethics class, and like after the third book of reading like these Renaissance, the Voltaire and stuff like
mhm.
that, I was just like, I don't know what is and what is not anymore. And
I remember for my intro poli sci class, it's an intro level class. So the professor's like, all right, guys, you're going to be reading Hobbes's Leviathan for next week. Okay, well, I'll try. And I get in, and it's like, by page 5, I realize I have no idea what I'm reading anymore. Like, these words, like, these are all words I recognize, but you put them in these orders, and all of a sudden they don't make sense anymore. It's like, nope, nope, just sorry, I will pick it up from context. So I would not recommend actually reading these thinkers, but rather read up on the history around them, read up on who they are as people. Like, that's what's important, is who are they as people,
Hmm.
and then try to mirror that in your villains, try to mirror that in your cultists and your occultists. um, because that, I think, is the sort of thing that will really bring your game to life, because it will feel thematically familiar to your players.
Hmm.
um, Odds aren't bad that if you are running a game like this, you have somebody in your group, maybe multiple somebodies, who are just really into historical settings, right? Like, this is their jam. And for players like that, um, doing these sorts of thematic mirrorings, really draws them into the game, really gets them excited. And as a game master, that's a wonderful thing, because they get other people excited, right? Like, as soon as Susan's excited, she's leaning over to James next to him, being like, this is related, blah 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 blah. And like, excitement is contagious. If one person's having fun, it makes other people have fun.
Hmm.
So you kind of use those players as ambassadors to make sure that everybody at the table's having a good time. Yeah, I would read up on these Enlightenment figures, and mirror them, parallel them, and in some cases reverse them, in order to make your villains, in order to make your occultists, and just kind of lean into it.
Ooh, yeah, that's some good stuff. I know. So, actually, Friday is one of the first times I've been wanting to run Lexiculta myself for like maybe about a year. So Friday's actually the first time that I'm getting a chance to run it with a group.
Oh yeah.
So I'm just like soaking this up like a sponge. Um, so for in terms of like interacting as maybe a player with other NPCs and such, what are kind of tips you would have to? Is there any like research that should be done? Anything to keep in mind? General ways of thinking during the 18th century that would kind of help with interacting with these people and making it more real.
Oh geez. That's a really interesting question. Because normally, right, all the heavy lifting's on the GM side.
Hmm.
It's up to the GM to make the world feel alive. It's up to the GM to make the world feel like 18th century. Um, and I would say a huge amount of that depends on what sort of character you're playing.
Hmm.
Um, if you are playing, God forbid, if you are playing an Enlightenment figure, maybe it might be worth your time to read up on the Spark Notes. Or if you are playing someone who's operating in that particular social orbit, it might be worthwhile to read up on the ideas that were circulating at the time, because then you can be grounding your decisions as a character in the sorts of things that your character would be grounding
Hmm.
your decisions in, and that will go a long way to doing the GM a solid by making the world feel more like the GM is trying to feel. Um, I read a book a few months back, fiction, a work of fiction, um, about a group of traveling players in the Middle Ages, who had to investigate a mystery, right? Like, these
Yeah.
guys are people who travel from town to town putting on mystery plays to earn their bread and butter. They're actors. The lowest social rung in medieval Europe, right? Like, one step above lepers,
Yeah.
roughly equal with prostitutes. And they are investigating a mystery in this town they've arrived in. And one of the things that did such an amazing job to ground the book in the sense of place and of time was that the point of view character was an ex monk, an ex member of the clergy, and everything that this guy was doing and thinking and saying was grounded in medieval scholastic theology, in this very particular brand of Catholic theology, which was enormously influential at the time. And like, all of his decision making, like, should we go left or should we go right? Well, let me think about what Aquinas would say. Like, well, should we investigate the murder or should we not? Well, let me think about what Augustine would say.
Yeah.
And it really served to ground the story. And so if you can do something similar, it is a lot of heavy lifting. So, like, if you're a player, you're probably used to not doing the heavy lifting. But by God, if you can get your headspace in the same historical context as your character's headspace, man, you're gonna kill it, and you're gonna earn major brownie points from your GM, I suspect.
So we have a discourse in the chat
Ah,
about avoiding history, just because it's a lot of there's a lot there that comes into the game that you don't normally have to worry about in games set in this time, or at least like Pathfinder, D&D, where the kind of the lore and the history and all that stuff fits in like a very small group of pages. What would be your tips for the GM to kind of alleviate these concerns and guide players through like a historical game, as well as I don't know, maybe some comforting thoughts for those who are like, that looks huge, trying to get involved, but I still want to play in it.
so there's a couple different ways to handle this. One way, the easy way, which is a way that, boy, I sure do a lot of at my table because it's easy, um, is is to say, I really want to run a game about Byzantine political intrigue, but I don't want to spend the next 8 months of my life reading up on the history of the Byzantine Empire and court politics. And I'm really worried that, like, one of my players, boy, I know that Joel is really smart on Byzantine history. And, if I make a mistake, Joel's going to call me out on it in front of all my friends, and I'm going to look dumb. So, one very easy way to handle it is, okay, it's not court intrigue in Byzantium, in the palace in Constantinople. It's court intrigue in Byzantopolis, a purely fictional setting that is definitely based on Byzantine history.
Hmm.
But because it's fictional, you can take it in whatever direction you want. And all of a sudden, this great weight is lifted off your shoulders. Because if you are concerned that, King whatever the 14th wouldn't have made this decision, well, who cares? Because it's not King whatever the 14th. It's a fictional guy that you're writing, and you can make him do whatever you think is appropriate. So that's the easy way.
Yeah.
It's fictional and do what you want. Another way to do it is to enlist that player. If you know that Joel is gonna be really smart on subject X, get Joel on board. Get him in the planning process. A buddy of mine, for example, is gearing up to run a Red Dawn campaign. I'm going to be playing in it, and obviously it's in a fictional setting, but it's an alternate history setting. I'm ex-military, so this is a subject that I have a certain amount of expertise in, and so my buddy's just saying, "Hey, Tristan, like, you're going to be playing in this. Let's talk." And so he's getting me on board on the ground floor, and whenever something comes up in game, like, he can turn to me and be like, "Hey, would you do it X way or would you do it Y way?" And I can give him an answer. And this is critical: if you're gaming with somebody, you're probably friends with them. If you're gaming with people you don't like, you probably shouldn't be gaming with them anyway. So if my buddy is doing something in his Red Dawn campaign that I recognize as inaccurate, like it's just wrong, what am I going to freak out? Am I going to be like, "Oh, we're not friends anymore"? Like, of course not. I might let him know after the game, but I might also just be like, "Yeah, this is how it works in this Red Dawn game. Who cares?" So yeah, if you have a more knowledgeable friend, like, get him or her on board, and then, like, accept that they're your friend. So who cares if you screw up in front of them, right? Like, it's
Yeah,
not a big deal.
definitely. So another thing I also have been discussing with other people and such is playing in these historical timepiece games, but trying to find a balance between realism, but also creating an environment that is comfortable for the players. So one thing that really shines in my mind is something that is usually brought up, is usually history isn't kind to minorities as well as women.
Yeah, no,
Um,
in most times and places, that is sure true.
Yeah, and I know for Lexicultum, when I'm playing it, There, I've told my players, you will never experience sexism. Your character will never experience sexism because it's
Mhm.
not something that they themselves want to explore. But you will see the acts of sex. You'll see sexism within within the NPCs and such like that. So that's kind of like the line we've drawn there. But I'm curious, what have you done to deal with that, and your thoughts on kind of that tough issue.
So there's two ways that you can do this that immediately come to my mind. Um, well, boy, more than two. All right, there's a
Go
bunch of
ahead,
ways I
yeah,
can
shoot
think of.
them out.
One of them is embrace it, go whole hog, right?
Hmm.
Only if you have players who actually want to game that way,
Hmm.
right? If you're playing Harlem Unbound, racism is a critical part of the game. Your players probably told you, hey, we want to play Harlem Unbound because we want to grapple with this. Cool, go whole hog on it.
Yeah.
Another way is to acknowledge it, but not really role play it.
Hmm.
This is what I did for a Trail of Cthulhu campaign a few years back, where no one was playing minorities, but I had female players playing female characters. And we just sort of acknowledged it. But hey, I'm here with my friends. Like, I'm not going to go be fake sexist,
Yeah.
fake people played by real people that I care about. So we would just sort of acknowledge that hey, people are looking at you funny because you're a female chemist being very competent, but we move on.
Hmm.
And that's kind of the level that we did it. And then the final way, which is honestly the way that I do it more these days, is just not kind of very much like you described, not have it be a thing at all.
Yeah.
Because all RPG settings, no matter how historical, are ultimately fictional,
Hmm.
right? Like, you're not actually doing, even if you are playing a game that is historical fiction, capital H, capital F, that is, as historically grounded as possible. Well, guess what? There's still details you're getting wrong. There's still details you're omitting because they're not relevant to the story. There's still things you're not talking about because they're not fun. You're in a fictional setting, buddy, like whether you like it or not. So if you're already in a fictional setting, just like have it be a fictional setting where if nobody wants to deal with racism and sexism and all the other forms of prejudice and discrimination, it's just a world where that's not relevant. And if you're playing a black character and you go to vote, nobody stops you, nobody remarks upon it. It's just not a
Hmm.
thing.
Yeah.
And that's just another way you can handle it.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that like comes to mind because I know some people would be like, we're doing a historical game, it has to be, set right and stuff like that. But if you ever watched, what Hollywood puts out in terms of their like historic films, you realize that a lot of it is, I mean, all of it is just fiction.
Yes.
Either romanticized or other things are thrown in that have no business being in it. And so if obviously if a grand giant like that can take liberties within their creative pursuits, GMs and players and stuff like that feel free to make the world your own because it is, play the game you want to.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, we're all here to have a good time. Um, it really grinds my gears at the risk of me running off on a tangent. So, like, cut me off at any point. But
Go
it really
ahead.
grinds my gears when people get grumpy about supposed ahistoricity, unhistorical things in settings that are explicitly fictional, right?
Hmm.
Like, I get super grumpy because in Game of Thrones, people aren't wearing hats enough. In the real Middle Ages, people always wore hats. Like, bro, it's not the real Middle Ages. Like, what is your problem? My D&D setting, like, women aren't being oppressed enough in my GM's D&D setting. Like, bro, your D&D setting isn't in the real Middle Ages. I don't know how to break this to you. It's not reality.
Yeah.
Like, if people being oppressed is critical to your sense of keeping things believable, people aren't oppressed, not believable. Like, Man, that's a problem with you. Like, that's not a problem
Yeah.
with Dungeons and Dragons.
Definitely. I mean, it's something that I think the industry has kind of grown up in, because I know a lot of past games kind of had the actual racial divides and stuff like that. That were kind of ingrained in the story and stuff like that. One thing that kind of comes to mind are like the prejudices, like the elves and the drow, and the assumption that a whole race is evil and stuff like that, which was decent for the time. But obviously, as people have progressed, more people are starting to play the game. The types of stories we want to tell, and the I guess the more welcoming arms towards diversity and different thoughts is definitely something the industry is doing a lot better nowadays. Uh,
Yes, I mean, this is me sitting here as a straight white guy saying like, yes, the industry that I'm a part of has made great strides. So like, what the heck do I know? But it seems like yes.
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully, it continues to get better. I mean, despite the was it? I don't know if you've seen the consent form that has been like shooting out all over social media. But it's basically are you as players okay with such, and it's like a list of things that might be triggering for a player. And despite the at least the perceived like progress we've made, it's become a huge debacle between the people who feel like it's irrelevant or unnecessary, and the people who think that it's better to have a safety net there than not there. Um,
I haven't seen that particular one. I've seen, boy, a lot of arguments about the X card on Reddit that seem pretty thematically related. Um, I mean, ultimately, if you're gaming to have a good time, like maybe don't be a dick to the people you're gaming with. But that said, every group is different, right?
mhm.
Like know your players, know your gaming group. Something that is appropriate for one gaming group won't necessarily be appropriate for another gaming group.
Yeah.
And um, I think a lot of people feel like people are trying to push one size fits all solutions on their gaming groups, and like, well, my gaming group doesn't need it. Like, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Like, have you ever actually tried talking to Janet about whether she wants some of these things?
Yeah.
But also, like, it shouldn't be one size fits. Every group is different, and go with what works for your group.
Yeah, I think it's the initial reaction to all this stuff is to be like look it over, see if it's something your group wants or needs, and in the end, everything that's kind of like in terms of like safety tools and stuff are all just tools that a GM can use to facilitate better and more comfortable places in
Mhm.
their gaming thing. So totally up to the GM, because you are the head of the ship, so
Yes.
to speak. So it's your job to keep everyone in safe waters and to create these exciting waves. Um, so let me, because we have a lot of comments popping up. So Determined Nerd says, yes, thank you. If it's not crucial to the plot slash history, what's the point of including it when it can slash will make people feel attacked slash unwelcomed? And I know it's something I've tried to be very careful about when having minorities in the game, because there was a point in time when I was only gaming with like the white male, so
Hmm.
there's not many points in history where we are oppressed. So it's good to keep that in mind. South 2012 said, I had someone get seriously really pissed when I had women as part of the Dogs in the Vineyard Church, which is part of the setting of the game. The church in that game is based on historical Mormons, and they put up a huge fuss even when I showed them the page in the book that said women were dogs too, they being the problem player in this context. And then Determined Nerd finally says, whenever it's a history-based game, I ask if there will be sexism, and decline it if I'll have to encounter it. I'm just not interested.
Yeah. Like, we're all here to have a good time. If you know this is something that's going to make you not have a good time, then you don't want any part of that. Of course not.
Exactly. I mean, there's the I don't know if you are familiar with the Legend of the Five Rings, which is a fictitious game set in a kind of weird combination of like Japan and other Asian settings, kind of pulled in together, where you play samurai. And I believe, at least in the previous edition, before Fantasy Flight Games got a hold of it, there was kind of a blurb that was concerning women during the time period, because it is somewhat trying to be based on the samurai time and the glory of the samurai. And I did appreciate their kind of note that you don't have to play it that way.
Mhm.
Obviously, see if your players want to even be involved in that, or if they just want to be like the awesome samurai, like the other male samurais that are romanticized in fiction.
Mhm.
And also, one of my favorite things is learning about like these female samurai, and they're getting more attention and stuff like that. So stuff that we're learning now.
And the player characters are player characters for a reason, right? Like they are unusual. Um, Whatever the context of the game is, the player characters are unusual within it. Even if you are playing a game where kind of the point is that it's all very normal, within the context of very normal, your player characters are going to be different from the non-player characters were very normal. So if the whole point is that the player characters are different, then even if you want to have a setting where there are no female samurai, and if that's what you and your gaming group want, then that's what you and your gaming group want,
Hmm.
and roll with it. But you can still have a female PC samurai in your gaming group, because the whole point is that the PCs are unusual.
Exactly. So I'm curious, have you ever worked on making like props and such for these games that you run?
um Once, about a decade ago, um I whipped up some props for a campaign that I was just running for my gaming group. And the conclusion that I drew from it is, look, this was fun. I had fun making the props, and the props are cool, and they made the game better. But this was way more work than like it than the payoff warranted.
Hmm.
So I just haven't done it since. Obviously, for the games that I've published, um, I create handouts and stuff like that for those, and I try to make them good. Um, uh, in my most recent book, one of the games has a shattered tablet, and part of the gameplay is picking up tablet pieces as you go and
Yeah.
jigsaw puzzling them together to figure out what the picture is on the tablet. And
Ooh.
that was fun, but that was also a something that I was publishing for money, which is a very different animal.
Yeah, I know. Well, I'm just posting up your blog. Make sure to check out his blog. That is in the comments, moltensulfur.com. If you're interested in kind of the work that he does, make sure to check it out. But nonetheless, so for my games, I've picked up this.
Ooh.
And my hope is we'll see if it works out long term, is to send out letters like every couple of games, like that they will get in the mail that I've distressed and stuff like that, so that they can enjoy it. Let's see if I got. Yeah, this is another.
Oh, that's well done.
Yeah, I'm trying to put a secret message. There's a couple of like cryptography things that I'm interested in the 18th century. One of my favorites so far is like the mask one, where they send you a letter, and then like a couple weeks later they send you a piece of paper with like an image cut out of it, and you as kind of like the spy knows to then put that on this letter that has nothing to do with you, and then it shows you what the true message is.
Oh,
uh,
that's very
yeah, I
clever.
thought that was really cool. In terms of me trying to replicate that, trying to have a full encompassed letter, but like with a message within that could easily be distinguished via an image, has been trying.
You could also do it where you write the letter out normally and then send the piece of paper separately. And instead of like Napoleon's face being cut out, Napoleon's
Yeah,
face perfectly frames the real message. You just have different words and letters be cut out. So when you lay it over,
that's a
you
good one. Yeah.
guys Not nearly as cool as Napoleon's missing face, but probably easier.
Yeah, definitely. Because I tried to do the one that they had, which was like an image, I think a silhouette of a woman, and I was like, how do I get a message to fit in this? I don't know. But there's a lot of cool stuff out there for kind of props and stuff, which has been really cool. Um, so any particular areas that you are most excited about in terms of like historical settings, as well as like regions within history that you are like
So,
enthusiastic about?
I'm a classics nerd, particularly classic and Hellenistic Greece. That's very much my jam. I love it, and I will cheerfully pillage that for any amount of gaming material. Um, one uh, part of the world that I try to draw as much content from as possible because it's seriously underrepresented, um, is Africa. And the trick is, um, when you go down to the library or the bookstore or the used bookstore or whatever, um, and you go to the history section, first off, you're going to find like 5 books about anything in Africa outside ancient Egypt.
Hmm.
Um, and almost everything that you're going to find is going to be either about the impact of colonialism or the legacy of colonialism, or everything is screwed up now and it's terrible, which is exceptionally frustrating
Hmm.
because that is a narrative that we tell about Africa, and Africa is an entire damned continent, and it is huge and diverse and complicated, and there is so much more going on
Hmm.
than everything is messed up, because everything is not messed up. Like, yes, there are trouble spots, but Jesus, there's so much going on, and nobody's talking about any of it, and everything is being glommed together. Um, Gaming material wise, every so often you'll stumble across a gaming property that tries to be, and sometimes succeeds to be, African inspired, but it's invariably pan African inspired,
Hmm.
right? With the exception of Egypt, there's never anything that is localized. And that can be frustrating because culture and history in different parts, even in different parts of the same country,
Yeah.
can be radically different. You look at Nigeria in the year 2019. Lagos is a huge city with a thriving business sector, and it's just like an enormous metropolitan thing. And then in the northeast of Nigeria, you have a long running Boko Haram insurgency. It's just a completely different thing going on, right?
Yeah.
And neither of those are African narratives that are commonly talked about. Boko Haram a little bit, but neither of those are narratives that are really talked about. So whenever I can find something other than impact of colonialism, legacy of colonialism, or everything's on fire now, I try to snatch it up and use it, right? Because I am not in any way trying to minimize the impact of colonialism. Obviously, it was huge and hugely important and hugely impactful and very deleterious, and obviously, but there's so much more going on, and it's so underused.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
yeah, I'm always trying to snatch that up and use that.
Do you have any like maybe top three favorite books that kind of either in like the little regions or stuff like that that you would definitely be like pick this up if you are interested in playing a game or if you just want to know more?
Well, let me
Yeah,
go
go
back
to the
to my
library.
bookshelf here. Back to the bookshelf. So one book that I read recently and is available in the popular press. So folks listening at home, you can pick this up. Um, is The Golden Rhinoceros, which is histories of the African Middle Ages. The African Middle Ages are incredibly underutilized because we have so little uh, written documentation,
Hmm.
right? And so the author Fauvel, who is a serious French historian of African history, um, is taking little moments where we have a textual or archaeological window into medieval African history and fleshing them out as best he is able. And these are snippets from all over the continent, from all different points. They're about a 1,000-year time span. It's really interesting. There's a lot of
Nice.
really great stuff to mine, and folks who read the blog expect to see stuff pulled from that book coming out in the next 6 months that's already
Yes.
written up and sitting in the hopper. um, Other stuff that I'm going to try to pull things that are really broad, um, because broad stuff is usable in more contexts.
Yeah.
Oh, here's a really good one. So Pantheon Press does a series of folktale collections. So this is their Irish one. I've got a bunch of different ones up here. Um, and Yiddish, Chinese, Russian, Japanese, just a whole bunch of different collections of folk tales. And so if you are setting a campaign in a setting that is inspired by or just trying to get that particular feel, these folktale collections are really useful, right? Because it's your source for supernatural events, it's a source for supernatural opponents, it's a
Yeah.
source for like the general ethos and thought process. I love them, and they tend to be very well edited and very well collected. Pantheon Press is what you're looking for there. And then finally, one last thing I'll call out,
Yes.
um, is the Landmark series. Um, so the Landmark series is a collection of new translations of classical histories. So your Herodotus, your Xenophon, your Thucydides, these classical historians. Um, which often can be very opaque. These guys, you read them, and Thucydides especially, he just starts rattling off, and then they went over here, and then they went over here, and then they went over here, and then they talked to this guy, and then they talked to that guy, and then they went over here, and you're like, hold up, you are rattling off place names at a mile a minute. I don't know
Yeah.
where any of these places are. You were talking about obscure villages as if they were like the capitals of modern European nations. Like, no way in hell. And so the Landmark series, and this is my very well thumbed copy of the Landmark Herodotus. The Landmark series, what they do is it is lavishly illustrated with maps. And so every 10 pages or so, there
Nice.
is a map that calls out, okay, in the past 10 pages, every time there is a place name, it's flagged, you go down to the footnotes, it says, hey, look at the map. In 5 pages, look in this quadrant, this place name is flagged.
Hmm.
And so it allows you to follow what's going on with relative ease. The footnotes tend to be excellent, providing really valuable historical and cultural context that the original author omitted, because the original author was writing for people who already knew this stuff. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't need to tell you what Megara is or why it matters, because you're Greek, right? Like, that's why you're reading my thing. You, like me, are an ancient Greek. And then it's got terrific appendices to dig further into the context. So yeah, the Landmark series, they're all edited by Robert Strassler,
Nice.
um, are just really, really excellent. And I'm highly.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely piqued my interest. I mean, I never thought of Africa in kind of like that context and kind of digging into the gems that aren't like looked at very often, especially in our time. That is some awesome stuff. So we have about, let's see, 5 more minutes before we gotta hop off, and later on we are playing the German game The Genesis, which is based in Europe and Northern Africa, obviously post-apocalyptic, so everything has changed. But nonetheless, a couple questions I had as we're kind of like in the coming to the end, and definitely thank you for being on the show. Um, What are some of your favorite events that occurred during the 18th century in France? This is like right
Ooh,
onto my game that I'm trying to run.
in France specifically. Oh, geez. Um, um, Wait a minute. There's a thing that I learned about recently.
Hmm.
Um, 3 generations, possibly 4 generations of cartographers in the exact same French line. So, like, this guy started it, then he died, and his son picks it up, and then he dies, and his son picks it up, and then he dies, and his son picks it up, creating the first accurate map of France, like the first accurate one. There'd never been an accurate one before. And the reason it took so long is because when I say accurate, like, they weren't kidding around. Um, they were doing everything accurate down to like the 10th of the mile. Um, and they completed it just in time for the revolution to have already happened. Um, and the king who chartered this map is dead. Actually, I think he's about to be executed.
Hmm.
And like the last map maker is thrown in jail because we're working for the king. You're obviously a royalist. Um,
Oh, that poor guy.
Definitely. And then one of their assistants was actually killed in the process of making this map because they're running all over the countryside with these modern newfangled surveyors tools, and there was like a bad harvest or something going on, and the locals were like, well, these guys are doing a bunch of weird stuff over here that we don't understand. There's a bad harvest. You don't have to be a genius to put 2 and 2 together. They're
Yeah.
clearly witches, and if we kill them, we'll get a good harvest. It's this really fun and interesting story that frankly ties in pretty well with Lexa Colton now that I saw it,
Yeah, I mean,
right? Like,
if you're my player and this sounds very familiar, within the next couple weeks, blame Tristan. Definitely something to pull from. All right, did you have any closing remarks?
yeah, if you like the idea of historically grounded gaming content ready to slide right into your current campaign, check out moltensulfur.com. It was nominated for an Emmy this year. That was really cool. And yeah, content's free every Tuesday. Check me out.
Awesome stuff, and definitely sometime in the future, we would love to have one of your content out here on the stream for people to enjoy and stuff like that. Either a game or some other stuff would be amazing.
Absolutely, just let me know. I am down.
Awesome. Also, love the shirt.
Thank you.
Thought it was very appropriate. All right, everyone. Thank you for a wonderful time. Once again, 7:30 Eastern Standard Time, we will be playing the Genesis. Make sure to check out Tristan's stuff at Molten Sulfur. The details will be on the bottom if you're looking at YouTube. Also on the podcast, the details will be on the bottom. And if you're watching right now, of course, you just saw it on the live chat. If you're coming from Facebook, that is also on the link. So definitely lots of avenues to check out Tristan's work. And we will see you guys soon. So, arrivederci.
Good night, everybody.
Night.